Hi, y'all, be man. My fellow hairless mates of the blue sea. It's me. We back at it again. Man, it's been a minute since we got to sit here and chop it up. Obviously, I get to talk to some of y'all online in Discords and other people's channels and stuff like that, but I haven't had the time. But I understand stuff. Well, first of all, this what are we talking about today, right? Because we're talking about devil fruits and awakening things of that nature. Now, this will be one of those videos where there'll be several, not necessarily consecutively, but obviously with Delphin Powers being so intricate to the series, not just because of their ability, but what they represent in the story and the role that they'll play later. I just want to talk about that stuff a little bit. And with the chapter between Law and Big Mom and a kid, man, the implications on how that could affect Luffy and some of the ideas I've already had, we just want to talk about that today for the most part. And I know we're supposed to talk about Cypherpole and what the world government's up to and law and what his purpose will be going forward, and pretty much always has been, and things of that nature. The supernova as a whole, like we always have stuff to talk about. And understand something, for those who I don't get to talk to as much, always know, okay, just because you don't hear from me, it don't mean I don't have nothing cooking, okay? Because always got something cooking. As you can see, these are just small notes. I used to have several notebooks, like before I even did videos or anything. This is actually how it ended up happening. Because I don't know if it's just tie over for when you were a kid, when you went to school, you used to do book reports and stuff. But I read differently now. Like not I don't read the story differently, but when I do read, I'm taking all types of stuff and notes from videos and stuff people said, and even my own stuff and things of that nature. As you can see, sorry, I know it's probably getting annoying, but you can see, okay, something's always going on in the background. Trust, and I probably have like I don't know, 4 or 5 of those back to front already. And that's why sometimes it takes me a little bit to talk to you guys because none of my thoughts are always organized a certain way. Sometimes some of my notes are done by character, or, sometimes it's done by chapter or specific subject, stuff like that. So sometimes it's kind of hard. And then my old ideas, are they still in play? Or some of them not anymore because we get confirmation. You guys know what it is. But because I hadn't talked to y'all in a while, I at least want to, so you guys know always there's stuff going on in the background. It's just a matter of how much time I had to post. So today we gonna skip over to the farmers market, man. Not farmers only. Hey, what you doing your time's your business. We're gonna head over to the farmers market and get the top tier, right? The peak of agriculture, where these farmers put in these work for these devil fruits, man. Not this artificial smile, not the knockoffs, not the bodega, the bootleg, the 99 cent store, the gas station, whatever you want to call it. Not those, the originals, right? Because for one, what we learned last chapter, or not last chapter, a couple of chapters ago, for some of us, it's pretty much what we thought as far as function, right? The ability of awakening. And we discussed this in what was the name of the chapter? Impermanence of all things, right? And how I went on about the double meanings there, intentional or otherwise. Most likely they're intentional, right? Impermanence meaning a change of state or the state of something. And you can relate to Delphus because that's exactly really what we got in that chapter, even though it was a reference to the poem and things of that nature. Because if you're reading SBS's, all it brings up all the stuff he used to read as a kid and plays and TVs and series and stuff like that. From the religious aspect of that word tying to the story, right? The legend of Momotaro, things of that nature. But with devil fruits in particular, if you think about awakening, it is the change at the state of how your fruit functions. And I say that because from some of the examples that we've seen, even recently, right, with Kid and some of these devil fruits where paramecia seem to function a lot different than the rest probably will. Zoans, they make sense because they're based on life forms. So they're awakening. If you think of Zoans, I kind of relate them to the spotter from Bleach, the resurrection. That's kind of what they're on. Hybrid form is kind of a resurrection. You have regeneration, your physical endurance increases, probably things of that, like that. Your actual durability, taking damage also increases. So it's kind of like if you think about what Peckham said, right? When Capone tried to, he tried to give him the 50 Cent treatment. And Peckham's, I haven't heard other zones say this, but he did say that because of his ability, he took half the damage. You know what I mean? So with that part in zones, their awakening, you can't really compare it to what a paramecia probably would do. And then with mythical zones, it's probably whatever their special ability and how important their awakening is ties to the mythology or whatever creature they represent or something that like what we see from Yamato, stuff like Mirror Mountain and Glacier, what does she call it, Glacier Fang, that kind of thing. Now Paramecia, of course, I don't want to get too much into Logia because that almost you need your own, that's a discussion by itself, right? But with Paramecia, if you think about how wacky the abilities are, right? Because you have ones where you either manipulate something or yourself, right? Or you create a substance, like the producer class. I'm still on the fence on if it matters or not, as far as which class you fall into, how your awakening will function. Because we know Katakuri and Dofi were producers, right? But they also, during their awakened state, they could still use their abilities normally. So other than them calling their attack something, it's not like what they, I made that joke, right? It's not like they just say awakening, and then from there on forth, all their attacks become awakened. Even though it's easy to overanalyze some of this stuff, if you look at those two fights in particular, because they're the best representation of I'll probably say utility, as far as how deep in detail their abilities were used in their fights, and not for gags or anything like that. Well, the Marienda, but you get my point. Where since Luffy doesn't produce anything, will his awakening function similar to a kid, right? Because Kid could change Big Mom into a magnet, even though that's a human being, but it kind of still makes sense because he's a human being, he's a magnet. So it's kind of like a power transference, but not really because Kid still had access to his abilities, or else he wouldn't have been able to control the metal going towards Big Mom. Remember, he assigned her a polarity and then assigned everything else, uh, respective polarity. So if he made Big Mom north, he makes the rest of the metal south. That's how we had that scene, before Law damaged her with his ability, which seems like a inverse of room. He put room inside of Big Mom. No pause needed. Instead of vice versa, where characters are always in room. Now, technically, Law is room, right? Every time we see room, it always appears from him. We haven't seen him able to use room without him inside of it. So for the time being, I just have to assume he is room in a sense. Now, how that relates to how he was able to damage her, I mean, technically, she could be damaged by lightning. I know I made a big deal about that, but then I forgot about the Nami situation. But it's still, it's still iffy with me, man. And Law's my guy. But as far as the awakening part, it just, that's what he did, right? He put the sword through her body, no pain for her. And we see room does not cause pain. Uh, I don't know if Law can make people feel pain when he sees the juice fit. Say, like when he slices you in room, he takes the effect from room halfway. Because we've seen characters get hit and they don't even feel anything. And Law does make jokes, but well, not necessarily jokes, but he says all the time, "I'm a doctor," even though he's a surgeon of death, which he gave himself that moniker as far as we know. But he tells Hawkins, murder isn't my style, and he makes jokes like that all the time, which is kind of odd, right? Because he always gets on Luffy's case for being a quote unquote hero, right? Pirates doing good things, yet Luffy's only alive because of you, homie. Like, you're the main reason. We still don't know what he did to keep Luffy alive, but he's the main reason. So it's just funny with his ability, it's similar to a Luffy because Law doesn't, technically, he doesn't produce room. He is room. And that's what I meant by that, as opposed to Dofi, Katakuri, someone like Treble, characters of that nature that are Cracker, right? Just imagine the fact that Cracker technically can make infinite biscuits, right? He's a producer. He himself is not a biscuit, as far as we know. He had the biscuit around him, but his body isn't made out of biscuits. They just happen to be edible, which is kind of weird, right? You see what I mean with the different subclass thing? Sometimes you can't even tell within them. So my mindset has been, if you're a producer, you can turn your environment to you. And if you're not a producer, your ability will be the inverse of what it is for you. So I'm a magnet. Now you're a magnet too, Big Mom. I'm rubber. Maybe you're rubber too. I don't know how that. Maybe it'll throw you off. Because if you think about Diamante and his ability, the flag fruit, if you think about that used on a character during a battle, that would throw them off. Because you're throwing off body physiology and who knows whatever else, right? It's just hard with Luffy because he has yet to be able to produce rubber. He just is. He's not a producer. But I'm not sure if that's going to matter. Because again, Kid was able to replicate his magnetic ability to another object. And he's not a producer either. So I don't even know if there's a rule on that yet. And I think if you're awakening, it might just matter. You be able, that's part of awakening, right? Being able to do things that don't make sense. Even with Luffy, bouncing his arms off of air with Culverin or Python. And we've had that discussion before about that, where you can make the argument Luffy's extremely disciplined and he has maximum control over his body at all times, disregarding hockey efficiency, right? And he's just controlling his body good enough. But if you look at the way he used Black Mamba, he didn't. It seems more like he has a target, and how it gets there, he doesn't even know. Like he knows, but he doesn't know. Especially with Katakuri during that fight, that makes it ambiguous because there's times where it seems like Luffy is turning his brain off, like he did with Enel, to counteract future sight. Because even Capone mentions just because you can see the future doesn't mean it can't be changed, right? That's how we got the situation with the cake. But that's, you get my point. Conceptually speaking, that's why I think like with Luffy, like, well, maybe he was already been awakened with some of his abilities. Like even if you think about Gear Second, seems somewhat awakening-ish because that Gear Second has nothing. I mean, how it works is because he's rubber, but technically he's not using rubber to do anything other than change the speed of the blood inside of his body, which blood inside his body you would assume it is also rubber, like he can, like his bones, right, which he can inflate. But when blood comes out of Luffy, it's normal blood, and I think that applies to all Devil Fruit users, right? Because we talk about the pocket dimension theory, where after a certain point when the ability leaves a user, it's no longer that thing. And what I mean by that is, look at the Blackbeard and Ace fight, right? He was able to burn Blackbeard as long as he himself wasn't touching Blackbeard, there's a caveat to that with Blackbeard's ability. When I say caveat, I mean if you're not aware, go back and look at a couple of Blackbeard's fights. When he's touching somebody, it's something that you'll notice about him. And I don't know if that's going to matter later, but it's something you can definitely see in one of his fights. I'm hinting towards something, obviously, with him. So that part might not be different. But once the fire was hitting him that was not touching Ace, he got burnt to a crisp. Same with Magellan. You know what I mean? Where once that ability is away from the user, it doesn't matter what you do to that substance. You can't like throw sea stone at it and it solves the problem because it's not connected to the user at that point. That's what I mean by that. And so when you think about that concept, right, of an ability functioning not touching a user, the Yami Yami doesn't negate other Devil Fruit powers. It just negates the person using them. I guess that's a long-winded way of what I was trying to say. So as far as terms of Luffy, even though I wasn't a big fan of the rubber room theory, in the context of Blackbeard, it makes a lot more sense. And you see where I'm going with this and why does it, if it does matter between producer and non-producer, because it's like, well, can he either turn other people to rubber or only other objects? Because certain fruits seem to work only with X, right? Law cannot swap personalities with a rock and a chair. That's not how that works. Same with Big Mom, where She can take soul away from homies that she's already created, but she can't take the soul of an inanimate object because it doesn't have one, if that makes sense. So it's like, well, for Luffy though, if he's able to produce Rubber Room, it kind of makes sense based on Katakuri and Dofi, but they're producers. But if you think about Kid being able to do the same thing, even though he's not a producer, it's like, you see what I mean? And the reason why I bring up Blackbeard, because, well, we all know that's who he's got to fight at some point. And really, if you think about it, just think about the fruits themselves and not the people who had them. The Gura Gura and the Gomu Gomu kind of neutralize each other. Like in the SBS road, it describes devil fruit superiority, right? And how natural substances can just straight up counter each other, like Ace and Smoker. Doesn't matter who's stronger. I mean, it does technically, but some person having the you guys know Aokiji and Akainu. Okay, I don't have to get too specific. You understand what I mean by that? So it would make sense for Luffy to use Rubber Room against Blackbeard because even though it doesn't fit Luffy's personality to try to make somebody fight him that doesn't want to fight him because he's never fought Coward before. Like, he didn't hit some people, right? He not get knocked back to the manga, man. You know, that's one of the best memes in the entire series. But at the same time, if someone doesn't display the will to fight him, Rubber Room doesn't seem his style, right? He wouldn't try to capture you and make you fight him unless he knew you were strong already, right? Or something of that nature, but he wouldn't do that. However, other than being overconfident, we know that he ain't got no problem with strategic retreat. You know, he wasn't trying to talk to Kaido at the time. He wasn't trying to talk to Shanks back in Marineford, even though we knew he was probably at least strong enough to hang. He wouldn't have just got like one shot or something, but he probably would have died, right? For what we understand now, especially with Conqueror's coding. Shanks could have had that in Marineford more than likely. He just didn't learn Conqueror's coding in 2 years. So Blackbeard did the right thing and fighting a Kainu where there's lava everywhere is a terrible idea. That's a terrible idea. Let's get up on out of here. If there's a situation where he realizes he can't just overpower Luffy like he wants to, he may try to run. Unless we see some secret stuff that, the real reason about his body being weird, supposedly, and things of that nature, I think Blackbeard really would run from Luffy. I think he would. He don't respect him now. But if he gets cracked with one of these Rio, because we see with Yamato and Kaido that Haki is projectable. And this is something that, we've talked about this before. Now, I don't think it'll ever be, we're not looking at Sero, Kamehameha. Think of projectable Rio more along the lines of Shigan, right? When we saw Ringing Arrow from Yamato, the first time we seen it against Hacha, I was like, what the heck? That was a crazy chapter for me, just that, because we always had that concept, well, if Haki could deflect, and then the focus on internal damage and not touching would apply the most to Blackbeard because you can't touch him. Well, you can, but if you don't know, and that's if this is really true about Blackbeard, because it hasn't been technically proven yet, but we know how Oda is with this stuff. So it's like if you were paying attention earlier in the series, you realize like, oh, okay, but Rio makes sense for Luffy, and it wouldn't necessarily have to involve his fruit, only when he hits him, right? Because I think Luffy, in his essence being rubber, depending on how closely your soul is tied to your devil fruit, it just makes it weird. Because it's like, well, if you apply that for Luffy, it should apply for everybody, right? If what I'm about to say, which absolutely makes zero sense, and I don't think that's how it works. It's just an idea I had. But essentially, at its essence, is rubber. So that means his Haki might be compressible the same way rubber would be. But it's like, well, how would that work for someone like Aokiji or Big Mom, who can she make her soul Haki? You know what I mean? That gets too stupid. So that's why I don't talk about that one much. But it's just an idea that I had. But once we seen Rio was projectable, it made sense to me. Like, oh, okay, so we can see a combination of Rubber Room, and then again, once a material is not attached to a user, Blackbeard's flute would not negate Rubber Room. He wouldn't be able to. He wasn't able to negate Ace's fire. He wasn't able to negate Magellan's poison. So by that aspect, he wouldn't be able to negate Rubber Room at all. And the Earthquake food, I hate when I say that sometimes, but the Guru would not, at that point is who's overpowering who. Again, it's not stated, but if you think about the function of vibration and then rubber being able to distort, slow down, or manipulate that, that just seems like that's how that would work to me. And if you think earlier in the series, the way some of the fruits, right? Don't you guys? This is a question I have for y'all about devil fruits. Don't y'all think it's odd that we haven't got any information about devil fruits on any poneglyph yet? Don't y'all think that's strange that that's never happened before? Like, I understand the purpose of the poneglyphs, but they also pass down information too. They're not all real poneglyphs, right? Some of them talk about specific information. And if you think about how long devil fruits have been around and the fact that Toki exists, clearly they serve another purpose in the story, right? In-game series type stuff. Even with the way certain fruits are coveted, like the Opiopi, because of their ability, we know these fruits probably existed for a specific reason to do a specific thing. And then things got out of hand, right? The more fruits started popping up. However that works, because we even learned through information about Gangster Gastino, Queen, and Top 5 Dead or Alive, lineage factor does affect, the lineage factor is affected down the line afterwards for a user. We just haven't seen devil fruit powers passed on yet, in a sense. We still don't exactly know what's going on with Sanji, right? But if devil fruit powers are able to be manipulated like we see with Smile, it would change how children are born. But if you look at Big Mom specifically, who has the most kids in the series, none of them display any inherent abilities that are fruit related. They just have fruits themselves. So it's just like, wow, that's kind of odd. I don't know which way that's going. But that's been my mindset on producer versus non-producer. It's just maybe once you reach awakening, you can really just do whatever you want, and maybe it doesn't matter. Like Katakuri wasn't out here turning people to mochi, so as a producer, maybe they can't do that. Maybe their ability only works on inanimate objects. Big Mom's is different because hers involves soul or life force, however you want to word that. Like we certain, you guys know that like the five characters I always bring up, right? The most magical characters in the series: Big Mom, Law, Kuma, and Sugar, and Brooke. Now I talk about him more now because even with frequency, right, and Devil Fruits. There was a chapter I seen recently I forgot about having to do with the Rumble Ball. And y'all know I've been relating frequency to the power system to begin with because if you look at the interrelationship between Hockey and a Devil Fruit user and Sea Stone and a Devil Fruit user, you get the same effect. In a sense, you get the exact same effect. And if you think about the sea and the salt portion being more, for at least in pre-time skip, the salt portion of the water seeming to play a role to a certain extent, even though standing in fresh water, right? Up if they're submerged, there's still issues. It's just moving water doesn't do anything to them, like rain, stuff like that won't do anything to a devil fruit user. The salt part seems somewhat important, maybe later because of again we're talking about frequency, like the aura that's given off from Sea Stone, even back with Law and Smoker when he was basically mentioning to Smokey have a weird aura coming from his well, I forgot what this is called, a jut. The it almost looks like a sigh, but having Sea Stone on the end of that weapon, Law could literally feel it, the aura from it. So like that in a relationship is going to be important anyway, especially when we get to Vegapunk. But it does play into the whole thing with Chopper and the Rumble Ball bringing up frequency. So it's like if you think about a devil fruit awakening, it's changing its frequency. It's whatever its natural frequency is. It's either, not necessarily an increase, it's just a change. Right? Again, Katakuri and Dofi could both switch between using normal ability and awakened ability during their fight. So it doesn't just make you from here on out, all my attacks will be awakened. You're able to differentiate. I just find it weird because it doesn't seem like they're activating anything. But that might just be because it hasn't been fully, developed yet as far as telling us what's going on. It's just more like, hey, you guys go ahead and look and try to figure it out, right? Like one of the funniest things about the story is trying to figure this stuff out, and it's trying to reverse engineer everything, because that's what Vegapunk's been doing, right? If you look at Momo's fruit, whatever the awakening version of that, you would assume it might be similar to Kaido's. You know, it's like, well, if we get that happening, what does that mean for the other fruits? And I don't really want to. Again, we'll talk about this subject from now on, probably once a month, right? Depending on what we learn in a new chapter. Because I've been thinking about that lately. Sometimes I want to talk about stuff more, but you don't want to overcrowd, information with, and I like to go on tangents, so I have to be careful with that. Y'all know already with that. But that's kind of what I've been thinking about. Like, okay, if this is what we're being shown, and I always make the joke about the emoji face blobs back at Whole Cake Island collecting the soul tax like the IRS for Big Mom, right? That's awakening. Compared to making homies, and they function different and they don't do their own thing. They don't seem to anyway. Like they just collect soul tax and that's it. And they seem to be able to hold on to it at that. None of the homies can do anything near that we've seen yet. And even though Prometheus, Zeus, Napoleon, and Hera all have their own personalities, they have the ability to act on their own. The regular homies don't seem to be able to do that as much. They just seem to retain some sorts of their personality, whatever it was before they were turned into a homie. So it's like the soul stealing, that seems more awakening because of the way we get. We've been saying that, right? A lot of us we've talked about that part before, but the fact in the chapter when she got used awakening on her by Law and Kid, the first thing she gets up and steals soul, and then the very next sentence saying using 1 year of her own, where it's like, well, does she mean by volume or does she mean by differentiation? Meaning the same way Zeus, Hera, Napoleon, and Prometheus. Like that level of her soul is taking 1 year. And like I brought up before, we make jokes about it, her having the Shinigami eyes, because how was she able to know how much soul to take from you without killing you unless she knew the total amount? She would have to know the total amount. Like if you're a scrub, you're probably just going to die anyway, right? But with Pedro and what was implied, what could have happened to Jinbei, she was going to take a specific amount. And that's the part to me that makes it seem like that ability with Big Mom is part of her awakening. It was just, we couldn't tell because it's the soul fruit and it's already busted and Big Mom is already busted. So you can't really tell. But I've always had that mindset. So when that happened, I'm like, okay, think about the chapter as a whole before you go assuming. Because we got Big Mom, Law, Kid, and Conjuro. Don't forget Conjuro in that chapter used the Cosmo ability. Now, I'm not sure if that's awakening. I thought it was automatically, but it was a couple weeks ago having a discussion with somebody in Discord that was like, well, it could be like Law's Aegis surgery. Is that necessary in awakening? It was a question I had with Law where I thought Law, if you, they made it sound like the Aegis surgery could have been awakening, right? So it's like for Law to practice that, he would have to risk his life. So the fact that he still practiced awakening, knowing the Aegis surgery existed, he had to either guess or already know that gaining his awakening wouldn't kill him instantly. Like if he was standing next to somebody, or they say they're in the premises of room, and he's just learning it for the first time. He uses the Aegis ability on accident and he kills himself. Or we find out that part is a lie, and actually what it's doing is tying two people together like a soul bond, and if they die, you die too, like that. One of those weird type ability. Pain. I forgot his name. Wasn't it was like a vampire with the Peyton? There was a reference to it, I think, back in Whole Cake too. I remember somebody talking about that. But one of the Dorian Gray, like one of them type of abilities. I that's just kind of like how I think that would probably work in that case, right? So for again with Luffy, he could really be doing anything out here, and he's already broken his fruit a lot. Again, the body control argument, but and he's bouncing his arms off of air. That's might as well be awakened as far as I'm concerned. We know why he can fly. That's a mixture of his fruit, Geppo, in Soru in a way. So that kind of makes sense even within the context of the series. Even like Rayleigh pointed out, and Dofi the first, even actually Dofi, Rayleigh, and Katakuri pretty much understood exactly what Luffy probably could or could not do with his fruit, just the way they broke it down by scene. It's just that Dofi disrespected the strength of rubber. Pause. He disrespected it, and he got his whole face cracked. You know what I mean? The toughest classes in the game, but yeah, I just kind of want to talk about that stuff. 'Cause that's been interesting to me trying to figure out the non-producer producer situation, how to translate that to Luffy, how would it help him in combat, and again with the Cosmo thing, if that's a secret ability, it's like, well, secret abilities does every fruit have this secret ability that's not tied to awakening? It's just that I don't know, man. Because some devil fruits seem, like I said, they serve a purpose. Drewy Bonnie's fruit serves a different purpose. Toki's fruit serves it. That one is really crazy if you think about that one. Because it can only last in an area for so long, right? As soon as the person jumps time, sure, they come back to I think it's a similar location, right? It has to be the same location, just different time period. That fruit is crazy alone because it has its own journey. And like I said, no fruit is mentioned in the poneglyphs at all. I just find that strange, and I know at some point I can't say I know, but I have my probability is like in 90% that within the next few poneglyph information we'll get something about devil fruits because they relate to how the Celestials either are or won't be in power later in the series, and why do they exist, and are they organic? They just seem organic in nature because they tie to the soul, right? And that whole aspect of it. And then when you have the smile trying to reproduce that, the only ones that they can reproduce so far with removing the theory of Kuma are Zoans, but those are already tied to a life force. Again, we've seen that, like, even when I was joking about the salt thing, you know, in Thriller Bark, that was the only way to stop Moria's ability. And like some of that is just, tropes from horror movies in a sense. But at the same time, in the series, like we get stuff that he either forgets about, or is a cool idea for him at the time, and then it pops up in the series later, like the Kinemon thing. Look how long that took, and it wasn't even necessarily a setup. And however you felt about it, you're like, well, based on the power, that actually makes sense. So that's kind of like where my mindset is. Just thinking about these things. I just want to talk about it a little bit. Obviously, we're gonna get deeper into it with specific characters. I just want to talk about it as a whole because of what I think we're gonna see next. Um, and the paralogia thing. I'll just put it to you like this. One of my ideas is paralogia is the equivalent of the relationship between the Renegon and the Sharingan. And that should give you an idea on where I can go with that and you as well. So appreciate y'all stopping by. We gonna talk tomorrow because there's a new chapter out. Just wanted to talk a little bit about Devil Fruits and Awakenings and letting y'all know what's going on. So we'll be talking in less than 24 hours. Y'all take it easy. Peace.